And welcome everybody to this episode of Communications and Cigars. I'm your host, John Crook. Thank you for tuning in. Got a little bit of a late start, but there's a reason why we got a late start. But hey, guess what? It is Monday night. It is 8 a.m. Central Time, and you have tuned in to, once again, Communications and Cigars. I'm your host, John Crook. Once again, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate it. We do like it. And tonight's episode is going to go ahead as I'm going to go ahead and quiet a few things here. So I got everything feeding back here on the side of me here. Sorry about that. But what we're going to talk about tonight is our episode is called Duplexers. And we're not talking about people that live in twin homes or homes, apartments, one above the other. We're talking about things that are used on repeaters. That's right. Things that are used on repeaters. And we're going to touch really quickly on the difference between a duplexer and a diplexer, because there is a difference between the two on there. But before we jump into all that stuff like that, let's go ahead and say thank you to our sponsor, who is JJK Communications. That's right, JJK Communications is a proud sponsor of Communications and Cigars. They are the ones that give us some of the money and some of all the technology here that we can have to have all this, the cameras and all that kind of fun stuff on there. So we do appreciate that contribution from JJK Communications, which also leads us into our thing is if you have any sort of questions about the show ideas, anything like that, feel free to reach out to us at communications-cigars@jjkcom.com. That's what's great. Communications-cigars@jjkcom.com on there. Now, one of the things I want to go ahead and talk about is normally it's communications and cigars, but tonight we're mixing it up a little bit. It's still communications, but it's communications and what I have in my trusty glass here, really bends my antenna, is actually a little bit of a difference, and that is communications and Crown Royal. Yes, folks, I am enjoying an adult liquid comedy beverage. And here's why. I don't normally get up on my soapbox here or anything like that, but I do think it is very, very important for us to go ahead and acknowledge some of our freedoms that we have in the world today. And I'll tell you what, some of those freedoms come, unfortunately, at a cost. And the way we get those freedoms are from the proud men and women, the people who serve in the armed forces that protect us day in and day out. And that's why tonight, I am in no way affiliated with this organization or program in any way, shape, or form, but I wanted to tell you this. Crown Royal, the company that brings this to you, has a program called Packages from Home. Packages from Home is a proud supporter. It's a 501c3, so 501c3, I can't even talk now, nonprofit organizations whose mission is to send care and comfort packages to deployed American military heroes stationed in active duty around the world. And that's right, this is just a kind of a brief little thing on there, and it kind of tells you a little bit about there. Package from Home began with the founder of Kathleen Lewis's son, a Christian, a soldier in the Army's 1st Infantry Division. September 11, 2001, Christian turned on the TV and was shocked to learn about the devastating terrorist attacks that had occurred that morning. Motivated by patriotism and a strong sense of duty, Christian responded by leaving his home enlisting in the United States Army that same day. So this kind of just goes ahead and goes to show a little bit about on there, gives you a really good story, kind of a heartwarming story. You can visit their link there. I was turned on to it because I am a Crown Royal fan. I do enjoy Crown Royal, and I found out about it, and I was just like, wow, this is really a great thing on there. So I figured it's just one of those things that, hey, we need to support our troops and to send a package there. So whether you're against the war, whether you're against armed forces or something like that, this isn't about the war. This isn't supporting something. This, I think, is something important that's saying, hey, you're supporting the people that are over there. There's people that are doing their job, the people that are doing their thing on there. And To me, I think that's important to be able to go ahead and do that. I know a few people that are in the military, that have been in the military, that are out of the military, as in like active duty type stuff, but they do work with special teams and special projects, special branches of the military within the state, within all those kind of things like that. And I really do thank all those people for the service that you did. It's because of your freedom that I am able to do the show here, Communications and Cigars, that I am able to do what I want to do. And so it's kind of a nice little thing on there. Once again, I am not affiliated with it in any way, shape, or form. JJK is not, we're not, but it's just something that, hey, you know what? Sometimes you want to have a nice little refreshing beverage afterwards. And even if you don't, even if you're not a drinker, this isn't about sending alcohol over them. It's about sending a kind of like care package of, hey, you're in our thoughts and prayers. So as I take another sip, and no, I'm not intoxicated. Thank you very much. But for those that want to go ahead and do something on there, that's, I think, kind of something really good in it in that regards on there from that point there. So continuing on with the show, we are going to go ahead and basically kind of once again talk about what tonight's kind of topic is. And that topic that we have tonight is, once again, as I said, is dealing with duplexers. Now, the issue that comes in with duplexers, or the important part that comes in with duplexers, is that they are needed for repeater operation. They are. So it's kind of an important thing. If you don't have a duplexer, guess what? A duplexer is going to cause you a headache. Duplexer is going to cause you problems on there. But tonight we're going to dive into what they are and that kind of thing on there. So the first part of a duplexer, let's talk about what exactly a duplexer does. And what a duplexer does is what you see on the screen here. You have this repeater, okay? And this repeater, basically, it's the transmitter and the receiver, right? And we all know that if something is transmitting, it doesn't necessarily automatically means it can receive. So what has to happen in that case is you have to have some filtering. And that's what that duplexer is up there. That duplexer says, I'm going to allow the repeater to transmit as well as the repeater to receive at the same time. And I'm not going to have the two frequencies interfere with one another. That's what it does. A duplexer filters out the receive frequency from the transmit frequency and the transmit frequency from the receive frequency. If it did not, what would end up happening is that you would have the transmit frequency transmit, and then it could loop back into that receiver, and then it could blow out the receiver. The receiver just going to be like, I can't take it. It's too much, that kind of thing. And then as you see from the duplexer, it goes out to your antenna. All right. That's how a duplexer works. Now, duplexers are usually considered to be the same band, okay? Not different bands, not like a VHF, UHF. It is considered to be the same band. When you start talking about stuff in different bands, that is when you get into what we call a diplexer. And the diplexer is this picture right here, which is basically showing that you have a VHF frequency and you have a UHF frequency, and while they're not going to necessarily interfere with one another, you need to be able to put both of those onto one antenna, and that's going to be like a dual band antenna. So that's like, think of back in the day, a lot of radios had two radio ports on there. So if you had a dual band radio, like a VHF, UHF radio, you would have the separate VHF, UHF, and then what would happen is that you would hook this diplexer up so you could have a dual band antenna. This day and age, a lot of dual band radios have moved away from it. Where you're going to more commonly see a diplexer used, okay, from the amateur side, is usually when they have a HF radio that's an all mode HF radio, or so meaning like it has, HF plus 6 meters plus maybe 2 meters and 70 centimeters. That's usually when you're going to see it. And usually what you see on those cases is that the HF and 6 meters are out of one antenna port and the VHF, UHF is on another antenna port. Well, you can get multi-band antennas that is just one antenna, right? So if you have one antenna, you need to basically diplex them on together. That's a diplexer. Where else might you see diplexers? Well, you might see diplexers in regards to some public safety equipment where they need to run VHF and UHF, or maybe VHF and 800, or maybe you can even call them triplexers, really, where they're running VHF, UHF, and 800. That's not uncommon, okay? That's really, really not uncommon at all these days. And what it really is boiling down to is, and the purpose is that you don't want to have a whole bunch of antennas on the squad car, on the fire truck, on the ambulance, the squad, whatever, right? Same thing when you're at home, you're using it for the amateur side of things. You don't really want to go ahead and have all those different kind of things on there. Some people have it where they might have a VHF radio, okay, and then they might have a GMRS radio. Well, that's kind of the same thing, kind of like the public safety thing. Anything you need to do different bands. But if you're talking about in-band, when we're talking about repeaters, this is where the duplexer is going to come in, okay? Now, that's not to say on here you can't make a cross-band repeater. And I've done that. I've made a few cross-band repeaters that have basically been receive UHF, transmit VHF, and then I didn't want to run two separate antennas, so I had one nice high-gain dual-band antenna, and then I just bought the little diplexer. That's great. Cool. Awesome. Really easy, simple to do. You don't have to tune. You don't have to talk about it. But you got to have a radio that can transmit on one band and receive on the other. Not simultaneously, but to be able to do that. So that's kind of where that comes into. So now let's delve into actually talking about the different types of duplexers that are out there. Crown Royal, it's good. I can't complain, right? Right? So what is a duplexer? Is it simple? No, they're not standard across the board. There really are kind of two concepts, almost three concepts, if you want to say it. So the first concept is going to be what they call a BRBP, or BPBR actually, band pass, band reject. Now what that means is that you have a frequency that you want to pass, that it would say, okay, let's say I want to pass, when I want the repeater to transmit 155 megahertz. Well, that, as you see on the left side, that green there, is going to be that peak where it's saying, you know what, I'm not going to put any resistance on that frequency. I want that frequency to come out of the repeater and pass through me its entirety and then go out the antenna. That's what is usually called a band pass, okay? Now, there's a band reject, which is sort of the opposite of band pass. Well, pass and reject, right? Okay. But what that's doing then in that kind of duplexer is that it's saying, okay, I don't want to pass that at all. I want to put as much resistance as I can on that frequency as it passes through me to not allow it to go through. Or I want to put as much resistance to not allow that frequency to come into the repeater. And then, like I said, you're going to see that waveform for the band pass. You're going to see it upside down, okay? You're almost going to see it like the notch, but it's not there just yet. So just stick with me. We'll show you more pictures in a minute here. Now, the second type of duplexer out there is the notch duplexer. That is sometimes, how to say, the cheapy Chinese version. And I don't mean to say that because, I mean, I know there some things come out of China that are cheap, but some things that come out of China are inexpensive, but actually do work pretty well. So in that case, what's happening is that you have the duplexer, and what it does is it's taking that frequency you don't want and it's dropping it low. Okay, it's dropping it as low as it can. It's adding so much dB and resistance. Now, the notches are different. As compared to a band pass, band reject, hey, I'm passing one frequency, I'm rejecting the other. Notches are saying, okay, when I come in, the signal comes in the antenna, right? Or the signal's going out the antenna. When it's coming in, what's happening is the notch is saying, okay, on this side, I want to notch out the transmit frequency, right? Because if you're thinking of how a duplexer works, and we're gonna go back here back to my other screen here. When we look at a duplexer in that regards, you got to think one is transmit, one is receive. Okay, we want to On the transmit side, pass the transmit with ease. We want to let the receive come into the receiver with ease. But we don't want, as I said, the transmit to get into receive. So for an example, on a what we call a notch duplexer, we're going to notch out the transmit frequency on the receive side of the duplexer, and vice versa. We're going to notch out the we're going to notch out the receive frequency on the transmit side. So it kind of flips out on there. And that's kind of easy to do, really, is what it is. Okay. Now comes the vary notch. The vary notch also could be also almost called a pseudo notch duplexer, is what I've heard it called as sometimes on there. And what you're doing on the vary notch is, instead of having one side pass and then one side reject, or having the notch where you're kind of notching those out. And when we say notch, remember, like the thing is that we're taking that frequency. So if you look at the bottom of that red, I just want to kind of explain it a little bit further. That bottom of the red, you're really, really going ahead and dropping that like to like 80, 90, 100 dB if possible. Vary notch is each can, now in that case, does a band pass usually and a reject. So what you're happening in this case then is on the blue side, you're seeing that top peak. If we're looking at the transmit side of a repeater, right, that top peak is going to be the transmit frequency coming out of the repeater going to the antenna, but that dip, that notch, is going to be the frequency of the receive for the repeater. Now, if you go ahead and go out to the opposite side, now we're on the receive side of the repeater, the receive frequency is going to be all the way at the top of that peak, and then that notch is going to be the transmit. So that's what they call a vary notch. Now, vary notch is kind of a trademark name with like Comprod and a couple other things on there. So don't get too worried about the names of it, but just kind of that concept of what exactly it is on there. Alrighty. So now here is the kind of the drawing concept. And now I want to go ahead and I want to give full disclosure and stuff like that. Some of these drawings I took off of repeaterbuilder.com. If you are ever getting into repeaters or you do have some good on there, they have very, very, very good reference information. I do appreciate some of the things that they have on there for this information on there. So definitely go to there. These are not my drawings, and I do want to give them full credit. I do appreciate them for using it, and I'm not using it for any sort of financial purposes. Got to clear all that out there. All right, so here's kind of a little bit more of a in-depth diagram of it. So as you see here, this is just a standard UHF. We highlighted 453, 458 on there, and there. Don't worry about it. It could be any sort of frequency. UHF tends to have the 5 megahertz split, but VHF could be like 600 kilohertz, and I've seen it as far as 7 megahertz and everything in between. The VHF band got really farmed out and is really, really hellish, for frequencies. On some of my commercial stuff, I'm 5.7 megahertz. Amateur stuff, I'm 0.6 megahertz. And then some other stuff, I'm like 3 megahertz. So, yeah, it's a pain in the butt sometimes. But UHF, it's always like 5 megahertz difference. But follow the colors, please. So your signal comes in the antenna, right? Now, when it comes in the antenna, you see the transmitter is in red, and it's coming from the transmitter going out to the antenna. And then you see the receive, obviously, is coming from the antenna, which is green, going to the receiver. Now, notice on each of the circles, which are what we refer to as the cans, or the I usually call them cans, but it could be the filtering on there, whatever term you want to use. Okay. Notice on the transmitter side, 1, 2, and 3, the cable is green coming out of there. Well, wait a minute. Why? What does this mean? Well, as you'll see in the picture, it's not actually going like a T connection. What's happening is that signal comes out of the repeater, goes into can 1, goes through the can, the filtering, then comes out on a separate cable, which then directly goes into can number 2. Same thing, goes through the filtering, separate cable comes out of 2, goes into 3, filtering out of 3 goes to the antenna. But what we're doing is, in essence, the green cables are filtering out the receive frequency. So it's filtering out that 453. It's taking that 453 and making it look, doesn't even look like it's there. Now, opposite side, looking on the receiver side, you see the green line coming from the antenna. That, once again, comes from the antenna, goes into CAN 6, goes through that filtering, comes out of CAN 6, and goes into CAN 5, goes through the filtering out of 5 into 4, and through the filtering out of 4 into the receiver. Now, what that is doing is that is filtering out the transmit side on there. Now, when people look at duplexers, they say, how does a duplexer work? And I'll give you the 10,000 foot viewers right now, is remember when we transmit, we're dealing with AC, okay? AC energy, right? There's a guy named Tesla, didn't make a lot of money on it, but had a really cool idea on things, right? But anyways, point of the matter is, what these are doing is they're filtering it out, right? It is creating the path of greatest resistance or the path of least resistance in this case. So when we want to pass something, we create the least amount of resistance. When we want to filter out something or stop it, we create a path of greatest resistance. So in essence, in each case in this diagram, sake of a better term, 10,000 foot view here, okay? What we're saying here right now is that those green on the transmit side are creating the path of greatest resistance for that frequency. And then vice versa, on the receive side, the red is creating the path of the greatest resistance, okay? Now, this is a 10,000 foot view. I want to say that because we just talked about other ones. You're like, well, pass, reject. And it's like, yeah. Tuning duplexers is not for the faint of heart, okay? You need equipment, folks. You will need a service monitor, a spectrum analyzer, a tracking generator. You can even do it with a VNA, okay? There's a guy who might be in our chat right now, hint, hint, does a great discussion on VNAs. You can kind of tune a duplexer, but what you have to be able to do is you have to have the equipment that can do that full dB range. If we think of zero as no resistance, everything passing, really good, great duplexers are going to be pulling that signal down to like 80, 90, 100 dB even, if you can get some good duplexers. And what that's going to do is it's going to pull the frequencies you don't want and let those other frequencies and stuff pass. Or it notches out both. Once again, depends on what you have. Now, I've had people that have gone ahead and said, well, John, what is better than a not? Is a BR better, band pass, band reject, or is it notch or whatever? Well, I'll be honest with you. It's hard to say, because if you're dealing with low power, like if you're dealing with repeaters that are only 5, 10, 25 watts, yeah, they do exist and they do serve a purpose, right? Factory doesn't need a 100-watt repeater cranking out, folks. It really doesn't, right? But like Motorola, for an example, the GR1225s, Kenwood with some of their TKR repeaters on there, homebrew repeaters that I've built, or low power repeaters. Guess what? Those kind of repeaters are going to run max 25 watts. You're not really going to have them cooking or cranking out a lot of power. Well, then lower power, you can get by with a notch duplexer. But if you're going to be running 100 watts, 200 watts, 300 watt repeaters, yes, some do exist, okay, then you're going to have to step it up and you're going to have to use higher quality. The better the duplexer, so like a band pass, band reject, that's going to get you that separation, because that's what you need. I need to pass this, but I need to get rid of this, okay? So first one we're going to go into is called the notch duplexer, okay? This is an example of RFS, okay? RFS is radio frequency systems. They make good products. And that's why I want to say some people do these cheap Chinese duplexers. Yeah, there's cheap Chinese crap. Okay. It's called Amazon. Sorry. But there is. Okay. But then there is companies that do RFS like this that do have good high quality stuff. And guess what? That's not the cheap stuff. It looks like cheap stuff, but they're not. Now, look at this picture here. This is what's happening on here. So every repeater that you have is going to have a frequency, okay, lower than the transmit. So don't go ahead and think and saying, hey, wait a minute here. Here's the deal, right? It's going ahead in one of those deals where it's like, what is the duplexer? What is the frequency? No, each side has that, okay? So what's going to happen is you may go in low and you may go out high. So as an example, case in point, what would happen is that if I had a repeater that's, let's say, on 152 megahertz and I go in on 157 megahertz, the low is going to be the 152 side. The high is going to be the 157 side. What I'm going to do in those cases is that I want to go ahead and let the low pass. I want 152 to pass, but I want to notch out, which this is what it is. I want to notch out 157. I want to take and create the greatest amount of resistance. Same thing on the high side. High, I want to pass the frequency, but I want to notch out, get rid of that low side on there. So if you take a look at this picture, right where the word antenna is, you're going to see three kind of looks like square cylinders to the left and three square cylinders to the right. The low side is those three connectors, and you can kind of see those metal kind of like they're like little metal tubes, but actually what they are is they're coax, they're hardened coax through there. And as you see, the low antenna, the low side, so if my repeater transmits on 152, I'm going to take the transmit side, put it in on the left side there by the low. It's going to go in through that first square cylinder. It's going to come out that first square cylinder, go into the second one by that little black little cable there, it looks like, but it's actually like a hard, it's like piping, right? Okay, it's like a metal tube. Okay, and then that's going to go into the second filter, okay, that second square tube, and then it's going to pass through there, and then it's going to go out of the second into the third, and then as the third then goes into the antenna. Same thing on the high side. Now, what happens when you get into these filters? So as you see along the top of here, you see that there's tiny little screws, and it's hard to see, but they're tiny little screws. And what you do is when you tune in that screw, what's going to happen is that you'll see on that monitor, you'll see the signal come down like it showed on that notch on there. And I'll bring back the picture of the notch. So you see how that notch is on there? That notch is where it goes ahead and it's taking the red signal, that red signal, that peak of the bottom of the red signal is your frequency that you want to get rid of. Now, with that being said, what's going to happen in that case is that each cylinder, as we go back now to the picture here, each one of those adds a little bit of, how do you want to say, notching. So maybe on that first one, you're going to bring it down to maybe 20, 25 dB. Okay, fine, not a problem. Now that second one, you're going to bring it down to maybe another 25 dB on that one, but now you're combining it. Now 25 and 25 dB is 50 dB. And maybe that third one, you can get another 25 dB out of there. And now 25 plus 25 plus 25, as I went to school, even though it was north of Highway in Wisconsin, that's about 75. So now you're notched out that receive frequency, that 157 frequency in this case, by 75 dB on that side. Now, notch is good if you have a wide frequency spread. Okay. Now this, once again, here's another thing on here. This is dealing with, we're dealing in the 1.8 gigs, 1.9 gigs here. But look at that. What's happening is that you see on there, and I know there's a lot going on in the picture. Bear with me on the black lines, right? So the black lines you see is where the notching is at. So what's happening is that notch is taking that frequency down. Now, when you're dealing with the notch duplexer, if your frequencies are too close together, so let's say I'm not dealing 152, 157. Let's say I'm dealing with, let's just argument's sake, like 154 and 155, okay? And maybe 155.5 and 154 even. And you're like 1.5? Yeah, they can get that narrow. Okay, think of amateur, it's 600. A notch isn't going to work in amateur, because as you see those black lines on there, even though the peak of that frequency is going to be at where we want it, at that lowest dip point on there, what's going to happen is that if that frequency is too close to the transmit frequency, you're notching out the one you don't want, but since it's so close, it's not up onto the peak. You're going to be right just on that upward slope. Does no good. Notch doesn't work. Notch works great And I'll tell you what, I'm going to get into a left Twix, right Twix thing here where people are going to be pissed. Deal with it. And what I'm going to tell you is that notch works great, low power, large spread. Okay, like 4 megahertz. I would go 3 megahertz. Personally, I would go minimum 3 megahertz, but low power. Further apart, the further the better. Okay, that's what's going to happen on there with a notch duplexer. That's really kind of what it is. But that is what they call a notch. So nothing else involved in it. It's just taking that frequency down on the opposite side. So if, once again, example, transmits 152, receives 157. On the 152, the low side of that notch, I'm notching out 157. On the high side, I'm notching out 152. You want to crisscross on there. Okay, you do. All right, that's notch. Let's go into what we call band pass, band reject on here. And with a band pass, band reject, we're really kind of doing what it says. We're passing and then we're rejecting at the same time. Now, here is the interesting part about band pass and band reject. Each cylinder, as we see in the picture here, has a main tuning rod and then a fine tuning rod or a capacitance type tuning rod. Now, what do I mean by that? Okay, so if you look at the center of the picture here, you're going to see the circles, right? Okay. Now, what you're seeing is in those circles, there's a center circle right there, a tiny little center circle. What you're doing on those cases is that you're adjusting the giant tuning rod there to reject the frequency. Okay. Then what the capacitor is those little knobs going on the top two there, kind of pointing up, and the top two pointing down. Now you're going to use those to pass the frequency, to kind of capacitance to pass it through. So each, unlike the notch, where you're just taking the notch out of one of them, in a band pass, band reject, each cylinder, for sake of a better term, is going to be set up to band reject that frequency, and then to band pass a frequency. So this is really a pain. And I see in the chat here, there's some people I know that do duplex tuning. Feel free to chime in. This could be a pain in the ass. I'm just going to say that. It can be a pain in the ass because if you are not careful, you are going to run into a ton of problems because you're going to go nuts because you're going to have to tune you're going to have to tune the main tuning rod to reject, but then you got to make sure that you're tuning to pass. And then when you're doing it correctly, you're going to probably not only need a tracking generator, so a spectrum analyzer and a signal generator, but what you're also going to need to do is you're going to need a standing wave or a return loss bridge or a VSWR bridge. Because what has to happen is that you see on there now, there is a T connector. Unlike we were talking about the notch where we go into that cavity and then another, it goes like that, hops in. No, what's happening now is that in this band pass, band reject, the signal's coming through. And as the T connector kind of dips in, the T connector comes in, and then it says, oh, wait a minute here. If I need to reject, I'm going to suck in the frequency that might be passing, that AC voltage I'm sucking in to reject that. But then guess what? On that tuning capacitor, hey, go ahead and pass through me with no issue. But if we look at it, once again, let's go with that frequency of 152 and 157. So repeater transmits 152, the repeater receives on 157. We'll start off from the top. So the receive is going to go down that signal, alrighty? What's going to happen is it's going to go down into that first cavity with that T connector. So that first big right one, an upper right corner of that picture, that is going to want to reject 152. So the filter's going to try to suck up 152. But then that little tuning knob on the top up there, you see that little one that kind of points up to the top of the screen? That's going to be tuned to pass 157. So as it goes through that first cavity, it's sucking down 152, and then it's letting 157 get a bump up, like a speed bump, like on Mario Kart, right? Now, it's going to go to the second cavity. So then one in the top left, right? Same thing's going to happen. As the signal's passing there with the T connector, it's sucking down 152 because we're on the receive side, but it's once again passing 157. Comes out of that cable, goes to the antenna, and receive frequency is great. Now, bottom side, okay? Bottom side, we have the same thing. Antenna's coming in now, okay, or we'll start at the transmitter side. Coming out, hits that first cavity, guess what? Now we're opposite. So what I need to do is I need that first cavity to suck down 157 and let 152 pass, goes to the second cavity, now the lower left one. And once again, I'm going to suck down 157 because we're on the transmit side, but I'm going to let 152 pass. Now, the reason I say that this can be a pain in the ass is because when you're hooking these up, depending on what you have, you in essence, you need something that feeds a signal into it and then receives a signal at the same time. If, depending on what kind of cans in the cavity that's set up, you may only have the one port sticking out of it. If you only have one port sticking out of it, then what you're going to have to do in this case is you're going to have to get that return loss bridge. And what a return loss bridge, we'll kind of talk about that next week on there. But what it basically does is it kind of, and a VNA kind of does that a little bit on there, right? Some of the VNAs on there. You have a generating signal, and then you have you have something kicking out signal, you have something listening for the signal, and then you have the DUT, which is a device under test. So what's happening is it's kicking the signal going down under there, and then the receive side of your VNA or your test equipment is going and saying, well, hey, how much has come back to me? These kind of things could be difficult because now you need to return what they said loss. So what you're doing is that as you're tuning this on that rod, you want to see the greatest loss coming back, right? If it's kicking out, argument's sake, let's say if your service monitor, your radio would be kicking out, let's say 50 watts, right? If it's the transmit frequency on there, you want to see all 50 watts come back to your test equipment, right? But if you're kicking out 50 watts on the receive frequency 157, you want to see nothing coming back to you. And let me say this before I get criticized. I said watts as an example because sometimes people don't know decibels or how that does. But what you're doing is you're sending a signal out in decibels, right? That's the proper way to say it. I'm going to correct myself. So you're sending it out in decibels. So I'm sending out a great amount of decibels on that signal into that cavity. When that return loss bridge comes in, I want to see what I want to pass. I want to see all that decibel coming back for the frequency I want to pass. When the side I'm band rejecting, in this case, I want to see no decibels coming back. Okay? That's the BPBR. Now, most of your higher quality installations, I'm going to recommend a 4-element BPBR as a minimum. I use 6 elements on a lot of my stuff on there because what's happening in that case, this is the stuff that can handle the 100 watts, the 150 watts, the 200 watts. That's not going to have you get back into your receiver. That's not going to cause these problems on there. But guess what? This is where duplexers start to cost you an arm and a leg, okay? On there. No, Crown Royal. So that's what a BPBR is. Gonna be your most expensive. You could be looking easily $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, but you're gonna get the maximum durability on here. And this is the kind of duplex you're gonna need to do the 600 kilohertz, folks. Notch isn't gonna go ahead and work on those kind of things. All right, next one we're going to talk about is a very notch example, or what they kind of call sometimes a pseudo notch. And what this is that it's kind of working the best of both worlds, right? What it's doing, it's not doing a full rejection of the frequency like a band pass, band reject. But what it's doing is it's kind of saying, okay, I'm going to let you pass those frequencies, but the frequencies you don't want, I'm just going to kind of notch them out on you. And then this pictorial kind of thing is this, which is like, oh, good God, what is going on? So that's why they kind of call it a pseudo notch or a pseudo band pass, what do they call it? Pseudo band pass notch kind of thing. There's a couple different names for it. But what's happening in this case is that you look at the left side. We're going to start transmitter. We're going to start with our 152, 157 because it's just easy to do. So the transmit is 152. As it's moving in from the left-hand side, what's happening is that notch is knocking out the 157. So it goes in that first one. Then what's happening is it's going to the second cavity, so the second from the left, and it's notching out 152, or excuse me, notching out 157, right? Because the transmit and I can't talk. The transmitter needs to have the receive notched out. So these can get really super confusing, okay? This then is saying the notch on the transmitter side, in this case, is 157, 157. But then the last one is a band pass, which is then going to go ahead and pass 152. It's going to say, yeah, you know, after the notch is kind of taking you down a little bit here, now I'm going to go ahead and make sure I'm passing that frequency clearly. So that's where it's a band pass notch as compared to a band pass band reject. Usually in these kind of duplexers, if you notice, unlike the BPBR, band pass band reject, you're not sending a signal and it's teeing. You're seeing a connection between the filters. Now, go to the right side, receiver. Same thing, different mode, right? Receiver, 157, notching out 152, goes into the next notch, notching out 152, goes into band pass, passing 157, now it goes out the antenna. This is, these kind of duplexers are really good when you have good separation, but yet you still want to a degree, provide it on one antenna. You know, I've seen these being used on 5 megahertz split repeaters and a couple other different ones out there. But the reason that they are being used in this case like this is because the frequencies have enough separation on their own and they don't need it. I've also seen a unique configuration of these where you have a how do you want to say, more of a an antenna combiner system, okay? And what you're doing then is you have two antennas on that site. But what, instead of, you have one transmit antenna, one receive antenna. So the transmit antenna is like way up there, or excuse me, receive's probably way up there, transmit is down a little bit, okay? But what you're doing then in this case is you're splitting where that antenna is, and what you're doing then is you're kind of breaking off the sides on there. So what you can do is you could take a transmitter, let's say, is on 152 and a transmitter that's on 154. You, in essence, are using some situation like this kind of duplexer, for both of those frequencies to go out one antenna. Both are transmitting and not just receiving, because that's what you do is when you do a combiner system, all the transmitters are on one antenna, all the receivers are on the other antenna, okay? And then what's happening in that case is that you have to do filtering, right? But in this case, you're notching out the other one. So for example, like this one here, let's say we had a site that had transmitting frequencies of 151, 152, and 154, argument's sake, right? In this case, what you would do is you would take the left side of it and see three of those left sides. So what would happen is the first transmitter, which is on 151, is going to notch out 152. It's going to notch out 154, but it's going to pass 151. Then the next transmitter is going to be, and once again, only the left side on there, that is going to notch 151. It's going to notch 154, but it's going to pass itself on 152. And then the last one would be notch 151, 152, and then pass 154. Okay, that is not uncommon to see that. In our discussion here on this episode, we're just dealing with a simple standalone kind of duplexer. So this is, once again, kind of what they call a pseudo notch, a pseudo band pass. There's, like I said, a couple different names of this. Yeah, it kind of gets into there. But that's kind of what the whole thing on the duplexers are. It's a 10,000 foot view and it's a lot to drink. But, you know, as I have my little cup here, it is time for that part of the show of, you know what really bends my antenna? That's my little dude. Anyways, someone said that should be the logo of the show. You know what really bends my antenna is that people think that one duplexer is better than the other and that you should only use that type of duplexer for only that certain purpose. Like, for an example, I've had people that have said, I will not use anything but bandpass, batter, inject. If you're using a notch, if you're using a pseudo notch, whatever, then guess what? You are doing a crap job on your repeater. And I call bullshit. I do. I call it. Okay, that's what I'm gonna say. Like, if I had that little meme right now of the kid in the car seat that you see on reels, bullshit. That's what it would be. You need to understand, people, a repeater does not need to be at 300 feet on top of a tower trying to cover 100 miles. It does, and spitting out 200 watts. It doesn't. A repeater needs to do a function, and it's the word it does. Repeat. You need a signal to come in, and you need a signal to go out. It does not always have to be 50 watts, 100 watts. It could be 5 watts, could be 10 watts, could be 20 watts. Whatever the case may be, guess what? A repeater needs to repeat. In that case, you don't need to have a piece of duplexing equipment that is going to be the cost of the repeater. I've been doing this professionally, okay, since 99. I was doing it amateur, non-professionally since I got my ham ticket back in the 90s. Repeaters always drew interest of me. It was just so cool how this thing just repeats. And I had Vox repeaters. I had whistle up repeaters. That's right. You had to wake up, whistle into it. It would wake up the Vox circuit, and then it would go from there. Point being is that through that time, I have seen repeaters that have not required huge duplexers, that required little duplexers. I had a suitcase repeater, Motorola suitcase repeater. And that little tiny duplexer, I kid you not, was literally this big, almost the size. Well, actually, it would be about this big here on the cup. Okay, you see how big my hand is? But it was only on that big. And you know why? It was a 10-watt repeater. What was it for? Well, it was designed for the telephone companies, actually, back in the day, Ma, Pa, Bell, that if they would be working on an installation, if they would be doing something on there, that they would need to communicate through numerous layers of that building, that place, or whatever, that a handheld itself could not do it. Okay. Job site radios, 2 watts. Okay. Guess what? 2 watts may not get you 3 or 4 floors. So what you do is that, and this was the case, they were doing some building work in downtown St. Paul, right? 50-story building, right? They had a hard time communicating on there. So what did they do? They went along, and about the 20th floor, they put one of these repeaters when they were working on it. And then they went up to about the 40th floor, and they put another repeater on it. So if you were basically on floors 1 all the way up to roughly about 30 or so, you were going to be using that lower repeater. And then if you were on floor like 30 on up to floor 50, you were going to be using that upper repeater. Small low power repeaters didn't need to go that far. So what are you going to do? You're going to buy a suitcase repeater for like $2,000 at that time, because that's like when they came out. They were crystal controlled, and they were basically 2 handheld radios tied in together. But you're going to buy a suitcase repeater for, let's say, $2,000, and you're going to go ahead and buy a BPBR duplexer at $3,000. No, you're smoking the crack, right? You are. Okay, that's what it is. So that idea of concept of like notch is a devil, nah, forget it. BPPR is the only one, nah, forget it. Okay, I have a pseudo notch duplexer that I'm working on. That maybe a different story for episode. I broke the grounding screw off in there, so I had to call the repeater manufacturer, or not the repeater, but the duplexer manufacturer. I won't say the name, but they're in New York. $7 for the screw, $27 for sending the screw. So literally I got a physical screw and a screw. Okay. But getting back to it, what I'm getting at though, in this case is that, use the repeater and the duplexer combination. It's the best way to put it, that works for you. Okay. There's one other thing we didn't talk about here, and that is what they call a circulator. Okay. And a circulator goes ahead and helps fight any how do you say, energy that might be coming down into the transmitter, or could be causing some backfeeding on there. But the reason I'm saying that is because the duplexer isn't the end all be all. If you are going to go ahead and be using certain things on that repeater, you may need to have different aspects on there. Okay. Some of the repeaters I have, people will recognize when I say it's like the MTR 2000. Guess what? The MTR 2000 had a pre-selector on the back of it on some of those models. And what that pre-selector did was it basically was in essence a sort of a notch, but in a good way. It notched out instead of notching down and killing it. Almost, you could say, notched up. And what it would do is it would make sure you tuned it to pass the maximum frequency on there. Okay. So that all adds into it. In addition, on some UHF sites that I've actually had not only in addition to the duplexer, but coming into that duplexer, which was a let's see what that one was. I think that was a 4-can duplexer. Yeah, 4-can duplexer. Then what happened was that it had another 4 cans, which act as in essence, a band pass or once again, I kind of a couple terms will cross different minds, so that's why I kind of warn people and caution people. But basically another notch that would go ahead and notch out that frequency for only that frequency to pass. So like you were almost fine-tuning the receiver with that. So when you inject the signal into the antenna, not only did it go through the duplexer, but it got cleaned up even more by going through more filtering. So that's where I'm going ahead and saying that, this whole thing doesn't work on there. Okay. Now, with that being said, yes, you don't need to buy expensive equipment for maybe low power stuff, but don't try to put inexpensive equipment. I don't want to use the word cheap, just inexpensive equipment on something that may need more power or more sophistication is the best way to say it. So would I use a notch duplexer on a 50-watt repeater? No, probably not. Okay. Or if I am, I'm under the understanding that it's going to be slightly impaired than if I did a band pass, band reject. Yes, I understand that. Or I did a pseudo notch on there. Okay. But with that being said, think of that, keep that in mind on there when you're looking for the equipment. Alrighty, well, you know what? I actually went pretty long here. I think it was a good episode. We're going to be taking a look at, on another episode here, we're going to actually be taking a look at and kind of hooking it up to a service monitor here and trying to show you what the stuff actually looks like on a service monitor and kind of how it can be adjusted. I'm not going to go through a whole tuning tutorial on there because really it's not just, hey, I did it once, I could tune any duplexer. No, it does take time, it does take skill, and it does take that. But stick around to the channel. Keep a lookout for our next episodes. Like I said, we're trying to make sure we're back always constantly on Monday nights now that it's the new year and stuff like that. But we will have more of that coming in. I did a little short, if you remember back during the summer, where I kind of explained some of that duplexing on there. So keep it tuned to that. I want everybody to stay safe. And for those that have asked, we are going to be working on the After Communications and Cigars podcast, where we're going to be kind of continuing the discussion on what that week's episode is going to go ahead and be. And we'll have some people on there, some guests and stuff like that may not be on the show, but kind of a way we can interact with a few other people. So until then, everybody, I want everybody to stay safe. I want you to stay warm. Oh my God, it's been so cold in the north, in the upper north here on the Midwest, and then all the way down through some of those places on there. Please take care of yourself, stay warm, stay safe. And once it warms up a little bit, if you got a cigars, go ahead and sit back and enjoy them. Until then, everybody.